Hello, Jimmy Page. I didn't know you were visible over there.
So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. My upload schedule is now 3 weeks on, 1 week off. This is our second month of this, but I still wanted to squeeze one more episode in before the end of March. Clearly, the YouTube gods said no and forced me to take my week off, smiting me with a sickness I most definitely was not down with. So I hope you'll accept next week's episode as late, but also not. In that time, some things have changed. The spare room got out of control again, and the shelves I'm having built won't be done until the summer, so big shelf is over there now, and I have 2 temporary shelves behind me until bigger big shelf is finished. Next on the docket, a new Dolls pod. Someone probably got fired for sending me my pre-order copy of this book 10 days before release, but hey, it meant Emma and I were able to fast-track this episode. All about girl group legends, the Shangri-Las. These girls were cooler than cool. They put a motorcycle on their song, they played CBGBs, they were covered by the Go-Go's, referenced by Kim Gordon and Amy Winehouse. They are finally recognized as greats among greats. You can hear the wild true story of the Shangri-Las on this new episode of the Dolls Pod, available wherever you stream your podcast, but as always, Apple and Spotify are linked in the description. Okay, now that all of that is out of the way, this week's album is Mountain Climbing. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my posts tab. That's where I post my hints to what the next album is gonna be. I host polls, I make announcements. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written version of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. All right, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is an original. This is a Monarch Press lacquer cut by Sterling Sound, for those of you who care. This is supposed to be the best sounding of the original presses that you can get. Thankfully, this is a fairly easy record and pressing to find in good condition, and when you do, the price is right. So let's talk about this cover art. I am glad we're getting this out of the way at the beginning of the episode, because this was painted by Gail Collins. Rather infamous in the Mountain canon. She's kind of inescapable. She did almost all of Mountain's album art. She even painted herself into the cover of Climbing. In interviews sometime before he passed, Leslie West said something to the affect of, "I don't think about her." That's pretty much how I feel. Opening up, there we go, the gatefold, we have a Unipack folder style sleeve. Wait, she took the photos too? Damn it! On Climbing, we have the classic era lineup of Mountain. That's the great Fatsby himself, Leslie West on vocals and guitar, Felix Pappalardi on bass, lead vocals for Theme for an Imaginary Western, The Laird, and Boys in the Band, and co-lead vocals on Silver Paper and For Yasgur's Farm, Steve Knight on keys, and Corky Laing on drums. Climbing was produced by Felix Pappalardi. Roll transition. So let's set the scene. The Vagrants. This was Leslie's band before Mountain. These guys had been grinding away for 3 years with a fair amount of label hopping, the occasional pyrotechnics accident, and no hits. Thanks to a chance meeting at Talent Master Studios, in 1967, the Vagrants hopped to Atco, the Cool Kids subsidiary of Atlantic. Who else was at Atlantic in the summer of 1967? Cream, working on Disraeli Gears, produced by the mustachioed Felix Pappalardi. He heard of the Vagrants through their buddies, the Rascals. Felix produced a couple songs for the Vagrants, wrote one as well. All of them flopped. Cream were Leslie's favorite band at the time, so he was thrilled to be working with their producer. The following anecdote will surely pale in comparison to how the man himself would have told it. If there's one thing you need to know about Leslie West the man, it's that he was funny as shit. Case and point, the following. I'm looking at this album of Cream and I see produced by Pappalardi. So I said to my brother Larry, I said, is this the same guy who produced us in The Vagrants? How come we don't sound like Cream? He said, it's because we suck. We didn't practice enough. He says to me, let's go see Cream. It was actually the Village Theater at that time. My brother said to me, let's take some acid before we go. So we took LSD, and all of a sudden the curtain opens up, and I hear them playing Sunshine, and I see Eric Clapton and his buckskin jacket with a flash over his shoe like Daniel Boone. I said, oh my god, we really do suck. Felix squeezes the Vagrants in for some studio time before he has to work with Cream again. These sessions were a bust. Leslie said, quote, we get in the studio, but we didn't have enough songs. I figured we could write with him, but he didn't have enough time, and he tells us, I don't think this is going to work out. There is just not enough time to do a whole album in 2 weeks. I said, well, the group might break up. And he said, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. If you get something together, call me. The Vagrants did break up in '68. Leslie strikes out on his own. Conveniently, in the summer of 1968, Cream also breaks up. Clapton heard an album so good and read a review so bad that it gave him an existential crisis and he broke up the band. So now, Felix is suddenly free. He gets together with Bud Prager and forms Windfall Records in 1969. Leslie did in fact call Felix when he got something together, and Felix hated it. Quote, he hates the group, and he throws me out of the studio again. His partner says to him, look man, if you don't do something with Leslie, he's gonna shoot himself. After that, he finally got the memo and produced Leslie's first solo album, aptly titled Mountain. Leslie was a big guy with a big personality and a big voice to match. A mountain of a man if I've ever seen one. This ensemble features 3/4 of what would become Mountain the band. Leslie, keyboardist Steve Knight, and Felix on bass. Mountain, sort of the band, plays their very first gig at the Fillmore West on July 25th. Sun was contracted to send these guys amps, the same stuff Jimi Hendrix used. Leslie opens up the box only to find they sent the wrong equipment. They sent a PA head instead of an amp, but he's got no choice but to use it.
Are you ready for me to finish this?
Go for it.
4 mic inputs and 1 master.
Gotcha.
I plugged into the mic input. It was the first amp with the preamp. Gain, master volume.
Overdrove the daylights out.
That was the secret to that sound.
This incident actually inspired Sun to make Leslie an amp specifically to record Climbing, but it wasn't great.
I said, what are you redesigning? Just put it in another box and say guitar.
This Mountain LP came out in July of '69. This issue of Record World from August announcing Windfall's partnership with their distributor is the first source I found using the word supergroup to describe Mountain, before they were even a band. In his review of the Mountain Group's gig at Ungano's, Fred Kirby said, quote, Leslie West seems to be headed for a big career. Seems Fred was right, because where did the guys head off to just a couple days after Ungano's? Motherfucking Woodstock. According to Leslie, they only got this gig as part of a 2-for-1 deal. He shared an agent with Jimi Hendrix. It was basically an if you want Jimmy, you have to take these guys too situation. Watching this set, Mountain could have been much bigger if they'd been in the original cut of the Woodstock film. It seems they were one of the many groups caught up in that managerial game of chess I detailed in the Woodstock episode. Quote, we weren't in the movie. I don't know what happened with my manager at the time. He probably didn't get enough money. Who knows? Now, you might have noticed that I left one guy out of the equation, because this episode is a little different. I knew this week's guest was relatively accessible. He's done interviews for other people's channels before, but nothing like this, and I really wasn't sure if he'd want to talk to me. But back in January, I sent an email to his management anyway. Unbelievable chutzpah on my part, but it paid off. For the first time in Vinyl Monday history, I had someone willing to talk to me and actually be in an episode. We set a date, the day finally came, and the week of the Harry Nilsson episode, I interviewed Corky Laing. Corky and I chatted for almost 90 minutes. We talked about the band he was in before Mountain. We talked about the Festival Express. Of course, we talked about Wes, Bruce, and Lang. The whole 90 minutes could not fit into this episode, but most of what we talked about will be split between this chapter of the video and the next. Corky gives a lot of information I could not have found on my own, like how Mountain as we know it came to be.
Okay, it's been 50 odd years I've been telling this story. The thing about the story is it's true. Okay, I'm not exaggerating. I'm going to go back to the 1969, the summer of 69, where we were playing. When I say we, the band was called Energy at the time. We came down from Montreal. That's where I'm from, Montreal, Canada. We drove down to play Nantucket. And Nantucket's a beautiful island off the coast of Boston. And we played this really funky old club restaurant, very southern. It was owned by these sisters from Alabama. It was great. Anyways, hot in an August night in 1969, real hot. And this is Nantucket, where they didn't have they didn't have air conditioning until that summer, really, where everybody put the air conditioner on. I tell that story because what happened is it blew the electricity out on the whole island.
Oh
So
my gosh.
we were in a beautiful, a Sunday night, Saturday night, and the lights go out except for an emergency light, which is over the dance floor. And everybody was dancing. I was playing Up on Cripple Creek.
The band!
But I
dig it.
But you can hear the beat. Up on Cripple. Let's like, right? Anyway, so with that beat, I wanted to keep the people dancing, especially a friend of mine who was with a girlfriend of his, the South. Because it was a lot of the girls from the South go up to Nantucket and work as waitresses on the island. And I think her name was Molly. She was gorgeous. She was wearing a see-through knitted dress, and I'm playing. It's like this, and I'm watching her, and I want to keep them dancing. You know, I mean, at that point, I may have taken a soul pill. I don't know. But I'm playing, and I said, "Hey, Mississippi," because she knew she came from Mississippi. She's with my buddy, Roy, a beautiful, beautiful guy, great artist. And I, Roy, hey, and I just keep playing with the cowbell, because when you hear a cowbell, you tend to dance. It's got the
That's
Latin.
right.
And everybody, and by the but halfway into the song, the lights are out. The light is shining on her. Okay, right there, the dance floor. And I'm going, wow. And I keep screaming, Mississippi, and try to get her attention, So turn around, she looks at me, and I go, oh, Miss, and I just somehow.
It's working.
Mississippi Queen. And she looked at me, and I thought I would get lucky. I said, but I didn't get lucky. What I did was I kept the lyric. And I brought it home, and eventually it became a big song. He took her home, and he got lucky. But the point is, the song, well, it was real. The song, dancing to the song. That's why the song. It was just a cowbell. It was just a rap song. Mississippi Queen, you know what I'm. Time goes by, and I go, and Leslie and I are writing songs for the first Mountain record. And Leslie said, "You got any lyrics?" And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, Les, I happened to write this down last month when we were in Nantucket. And here it is. The lyric was written out just like that. Mississippi Queen, you know what I mean? She taught me everything. And he just took the guitar, picked it up, and came up, and just the two of us, right? And I'm singing, and he's singing. And boom, we knew we had an idea. And we knew it was pretty cool. So we had to take that idea to the studio at the record plant. So at this point, we had done most of the record. We were feeling good. Leslie and I did a lot of the writing. I was very lucky to be part of a co-writer on the album. I didn't know anything about it, except, if I may ramble, the band Energy was being produced by Felix the year before.
Oh, that's the connection.
That's the connection.
Okay.
So what happened is, and at the same time, Felix was also producing Leslie's record called Mountain. That was the name of the record.
This one.
That one, which is a great record.
I love it.
That's the connection. And I met Leslie that summer in it was West Hampton Beach. It was on the beach. He was playing with a band called The Vagrants. That was his band.
Right.
Okay. So they got fired because they were very funky. They didn't dress alike. Apparently they were a problem at the beach club. The guy that owned the beach club was also the owner of a club in New York where we were playing on 1st and 71st Street. So we switched. And as I'm going by, I meet Leslie. And Leslie, at this time, I'm going to ramble. So keep
Yes, please ramble.
At this time, Leslie is trying to get out of the draft. So when I meet him, he's got lipstick on, he's wearing earrings, he's totally.
I've covered some crazy ways rock stars got out of the draft. Wayne Kramer went on a 10-day meth binge. Greg Allman literally shot himself in the foot. And Leslie West wore a dress. Incredible. No notes.
And apparently his friend Felix Cavalieri, who was in the Rascals, across the street at the time playing the barge. So they were friends. Leslie, the only way I'm going to get out of here is the dress. Anyway, he got out of, but that's how I met him, when he was all dressed up like that. And he stuck around to hear us. So when we started, and we were dressed immaculately. We were dressed in Robin Hood outfits, beautiful suits with rubber boots. We looked very gay. Good gay, though. Good gay.
Yeah.
And it was really different from the Vagrants, totally like the Stones and that type of guy.
Okay.
Anyways, we're going back to that. That's the connection with Leslie. So after Leslie and Felix and played Woodstock that summer, it's all August 69,
yes.
The summer of 69, what's his name? Yeah, it's a great song. Anyways, so things are moving, a lot of moving parts, Abigail. So there I was playing in Nantucket, and Leslie and Felix were playing Woodstock. And I knew at the time, this is ramble time here. I knew at the time, because Felix was producing Energy, he loved the song that we wrote called Who Am I But You and the Sun, which is a very hippie kind of lyric, but he loved the melody. And so he asked Leslie if he could play the song when they played Woodstock, if they can put the song in there.
All right.
So in my head, I'm going, well, I'm in Nantucket on the beach, but I had a feeling my heart and spirit were in Woodstock. So they're playing. Anyways, that's the story in August. So after the Woodstock show, Leslie says, we got to get a proper drummer. He didn't like Norman Smart because Norman didn't like to play loud. Yeah.
And that was the thing then.
Exactly. When you don't turn around, you tell a guy like Leslie, can you turn it down?
No, you don't.
No. Boom. He's out the fucking door. He's out of there. So they would, at the time, I didn't know this, though. I went to see them when they played on Ganos at a club. And anyways, Felix said, do you remember he called me up at his apartment, and Leslie said, do you think you can handle the gig? And I didn't understand what he meant. I was just up there because he was producing Energy. I didn't. And I said, give me a minute. So within probably 3 seconds, I said, yes, can handle a gig. Anyways, so that's how it started. That's when, keeping in mind that this is coming into the fall of 69, we're recording and we're starting to play some gigs. And we had to do the album, and we needed material. Most of the album was finished, but we needed another song. So that's when Leslie and I sat down, and I brought him the lyric from Nantucket I wrote down. And here's the thing, Abigail. I had a band. The band was Energy, and I'm writing this lyric. I said to the guys, can you help me with this lyric? And they said, we don't have a record deal, Corky. What are you talking about? And they said, nah, not there. And I said, you sure you don't? Because I can use some help for a couple of things. And I wrote most of it. The one thing, a little trivia here, the one thing I needed when I was writing way down around, it had to be in the South, right? And New Orleans didn't click. A friend of mine, David Ray, who I lived with in New York before I had an apartment, he was a folkie. He played with Gordon Lightfoot, great player, great guy. I mean, he comes from Canada. Long story short, he taught me how to play guitar. And I said, and I was talking, I said, David, I can't find a lyric. I need a city or a town in the South, in Mississippi. He says, well, Cork, I remember playing a folk thing down in Vicksburg. I said, what? He says, Vicksburg. That's perfect. There really is a town called Vicksburg, because that's percussive, right?
Yeah.
So I said, Dave, if anything ever happens with this lyric, I'm going to give you 10% for that word. Long story short, I never pulled back on that deal, even though the time gone by and I thought we had the record, and the song came about, and we brought it into the studio and said, Felix played it. And Felix, I don't know, man, I don't know. And Felix did her saying, he's great. Oh, we know it. We felt it. Anyways, well, we'll try it. So we started track 1, up to 14 tracks, right? Playing them. Anyways, the first track was the one. Right? As it always is.
The first one was the winner.
Yeah, because you're not trying too hard.
Yeah.
Anyways, and to complete that story, we finished the record, and Mississippi was, and next door, the Band of Gypsies, which with Jimi Hendrix, are recording their record, or I think they're mixing the Fillmore gig that they had New Year's Eve that winter. So Felix says to me, because I had met Jimi Hendrix over a period of time in Montreal, sort of hung with him. Felix says, Cork, didn't you know Jimi Hendrix? I said, well, yeah, I met. He says, he's next door. Why don't you go and ask him to come in and listen to them? But then we'll have a vibe on it. I went, okay, I knock on the door. I said, Mr. Hendrix, I hate to disturb you, feel it with it. And he said, well, would you come next door? So he walks next door. The whole band's like sitting around the tracking. And we're looking, and he's sitting there like his head down. We put on Mississippi Queen, and like this, his head. And everybody's like really quiet,
yes,
staring at themselves. And
you're in the presence of Jimi Hendrix.
Right. And this is when he was soaring.
Yes.
And anyways, he lifts up his head, and we're all like he goes, cool. That was it. Cool. And we knew just the cool was the endorsement. So that, I think, is a pretty extended story about Mississippi Queen.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix was the first one to listen to the mix outside the band. And that was a nice kick in the ass for us.
Yeah.
That was the start. And keeping in mind, at the time, we were playing some dates as Mountain, but the material we were playing was the Leslie West Mountain material on that record, because we didn't have mountain climbing. Yeah. Mississippi Queen was the beginning of climbing.
One hell of a track to kick things off with, too. It's like,
if I'm rambling, listen, Abigail, if I'm rambling, it's only because of the 14 coffees I just had.
I know how it is. But really, what a track to kick off a record and a career with. It is in your face.
So that's, yes, carry on. I'm going to take a puff.
Is okay. How do you feel about people continually revisiting Mississippi Queen this way?
Freaking great. I mean, why else do you write and play is to communicate, right? That's what you're doing, right? You're there.
Kinda, yeah.
And I saw the part you went from 20,000 to 40,000 heads or whatever it is. That's what you're doing. You want to reach out to whatever and hopefully bring some joy and music and stories. So when you say, I never get tired of that. I don't know who does. If any musician or performer gets tired of it, they may as well run out and sell shoes, because I really love it,
I'm so glad. Are there any other mountain tunes that you wish people revisited the way they do Mississippi Queen?
Yeah. Certainly Never in My Life, which was that was the first song, one of the first on Leslie and I. See, Leslie and I were responsible on mountain climbing, because Felix was never in a rock and roll band. He played in a Mid-Eastern band. Called the Devil's Anvil. You may have that. It's all this Mid-Eastern music, and
interesting.
So that's all time changes. Very interesting. Interesting stuff. So, and Steve, the keyboard player, was in that band. That's how Steve Knight came into it, through Felix.
All right.
Yeah, because at the time we just didn't want to be compared, at least Felix, because he produced Cream, and because we were a trio, felt a little sensitive about whether we want to go out as a trio. So Felix put the keyboard in, which to me adds an amazing amount. Steve was brilliant. That's that progressive part in the band that people, it's very subtle, that comes in. What's that? That was Steve Knight doing his Little Diddly.
Mhm.
So where I'm getting at is I forgot what we were talking about. We're talking about which songs. Yeah, well, the Western theme from the Imaginary Western, Jack Bruce.
Yes.
Love that one. And but Nantucket Sleigh Ride. Hold a second. Wait a second. I just happen
We
to have.
both do. Yeah.
No,
Awesome.
the point is you're talking over 50 years, and I have to remember what's on this. Well, one of the songs I love was called "The Laird," which was a
I was gonna ask about that.
yeah.
No joke. I was gonna ask, how did that end up on the record? Because those two folk numbers, kind of in the middle, are so different from anything else that's on
Yes.
climbing.
Felix was a bit political. At
Mhm.
the time, you had the Black Panthers. One of the guys got arrested. He was on the Nixon hit list, and he was
Mhm.
arrested. And he ran. From the police. That's why it called The Laird is in Hiding. It was dedicated to this Black Panther
Mhm.
who they didn't find. I think eventually they did. But Felix read the story of him leaving, and I happen to love the guitar playing on that because it's in bulldog tuning. Felix had a bulldog, and he's playing a folk on the acoustic
Mhm.
guitar. What was the guitar called? It's a small acoustic, an OC guitar that Eric Clapton gave him. During the Cream days, he gave Felix this guitar, and Felix had it tuned a certain way, open tuning, and then the Bulldog Otis knocked it over, and the B string
Okay.
down half a tone. So there's that weird sound in it, almost like a
Mhm.
sitar, and
Yeah.
that's the Bulldog tuning. And Felix, I love the song. We did it once at the Fillmore because it's very, very open, very slow. And it's a famous story about him getting away or trying to get away. So that's the reason. At that time, the politics, remember, what's her name? Patty Hearst got,
Hmm.
you were in their daycare center back then. I know, way back. So that's was a political thing, yes. And again, it was one of my favorites. Sitting on the Rainbow, looking. The Boys in the Band is a beautiful song. It's about going on the road, and this was like a prequel to Nantucket Sleigh Ride.
So you did bring up quickly there that Mountain were sort of called the American Cream
Yeah.
by some fans and critics. Clearly that connection comes from somewhere. How did you guys get to recording Theme from an Imaginary Western?
Good question. There was a record that he was producing a great deal during the 68, 69, 70. He was producing Jack's record called Songs for a Tailor because they split up and then you had your record, Layla. Remember
Mm-hmm.
that band and Jack wasn't in that band. So he went to do his own record and he had this song, Theme from an Imaginary Western, on that record.
When the wagons leave the city for the forest and further on.
Felix loved it so much that he asked Jack if he can do it because the record was coming out around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how Felix came to sing it and play it. And that became a huge favorite when we play that because the song is about a band breaking up, right? That's the song that talks about Cream breaking up when the wagons leave the city. And the lyric on that is all about,
Right.
and the girls with no regret.
Mhm.
It's a lot of symbolism in that. But that's the song of Cream breaking up. And that was a big thing for Felix because that was his baby at the time before Mountain. We got the benefit of people thinking that was our song. That was kind of cool.
Did kind of work out.
Yeah.
So that was, of course, a song that Felix sang. You guys had two singers, Leslie with that impossibly loud, bluesy belt, and Felix with an almost folk tone. How do you feel the unique asset of two singers helped shape your music?
Well, that's a great question because it was very helpful. I mean, having two singers gives the band a dynamic, and that particular dynamic, I remember when I was, don't forget I was the sideman in that
Mhm.
band. I was just a drummer, but I knew a little bit, and I got Leslie over here. She, like you said, the brash vocal,
Mhm.
and you got the beautiful sort of woman tone of Felix's
Yeah.
voice. And you listen to Silver Paper. I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of like two different bands. And then you listen to the themes. You listen to Yasker's Farm, which is Whom I Bet You in the Sun, changed the name, and you have the two singers. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know if this is working. You know, I mean, it's really, really different. So at the time, it was novel. It was novel, but on stage, it looks really good. Bam, bam, bam. And the two of them, you know, bracing off on the jams. And I felt like the Henry Kissinger of the band, things together.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say about the double singing, except that first, I didn't even think it would work. And how wrong I was, Abigail.
Yeah.
Wrong. Totally wrong.
It was very atypical for the time, really. The only other groups I can think of with multiple singers at your same time frame would be like the harmony vocal groups out in California, that whole Laurel Canyon thing. So from the outside looking in, Mountain is kind of an oddball band. You know, there's larger than life personalities, this composed blonde guy on the keys and you holding it down in the back. What made all of your seemingly disparate personalities gel together?
Well, the good question is it didn't. No, I'm kidding. Let's throw this girl off. It worked sometimes. When it worked, it really worked. But there were some situations that came in at that time because it was a first record. Felix was never in a rock band, and here he was, the leader and bass player of the band. And there were some very awkward moments. For instance, because Felix was the bass player of the band and the producer, the bass took a good portion of the groove in the vinyl. So what happened is, I remember we finished the record, I think at the time, December, like just before Christmas. Everybody went their own way, right? And the record was being pressed. And get a call. He's in Bimini. Felix is in Bimini. I'm in Montreal trying to catch up to a couple of girlfriends. And he gets a call. The record is not on the mother record is not working because the needle can't stay in the hole because there's too much bass.
It was jumping out of the groove. No way.
That record was out of the groove a good deal of time. Yeah. So he had to come back and remix the entire record so that the bass, and he was pissed because the sound. And the weird thing about that is Leslie and I playing in bands over the years before Mountain, we would hear his bass. He didn't really have a bass sound. He was a folky. He played folk bass and he played folk. And you're right, great. And he played with all the folkies around Greenwich Village. So what happened is Leslie and I would sort of make fun of Felix, like, what's he going to? So Felix turned it up to 11. Oh, it's fun. So he gets on, and Leslie and I said, like, the people would do interviews. Well, what do you think of this? And Leslie and I would say, we try to stay away from the sound of the bass as an elephant fart. That was our description of the bottom. And we didn't tell Felix about that. The point is, it worked because that's the way he knew how to play at 11. And he would just, if you listen to Mountain live, in those days, we didn't have the sophistication of the miking and the speakers. So it was pretty organic or bohemian. It's called what you want. It was not mixed properly. It was like, yeah. They think on the bottom of the Mountain record says this record sounds better played loud or something. This time that he was the producer, so he could say that. So the idea of the characters in the band, Steve was the quiet one, and he's very bright guy, very bright. Steve and I got along to the extent where I remember saying to Felix, listen, we could save a lot of money. If Steve and I can bunk up together. We're staying at these hotels on the road. We got 5 hotel rooms. And I'm saying, Felix says, absolutely not. I said, saving. He didn't want to because he didn't want to get into cahoots. He didn't want, like, all of a sudden the organ player and drummer, like
band politics and all that messy stuff.
You named it. So what I'm saying is the band politics was there, and we got through a lot of it because when we got on stage and played, it didn't make any difference who the character was. The music just transcended that at that point because we did a lot of playing off the songs. Felix, as I said before, Felix and Steve were in this Devil's Anvil Mid-Eastern band. that played every time signature you can think of. You know, it's like playing with Ravi Shankar on the entire state of India. I loved it, but it taught me a great deal. And if you listen to some of the records, some of the other records that Mount did, there's some progressive changes in there because of that. And they were challenging. As a drummer, I could tell you that. We were loud, and it was a challenge to play in that. And that's why the cowbell is in the beginning of Mississippi Queen. Because I couldn't, one, two, you couldn't hear me say 2, 3. So it would be
That's how you count in.
bam, and that's the way we recorded it. And I remember going to Felix and saying, "So what are you going to do with the cowbell intro?" He went, "I don't know." I said, "Keep it." And as it turned out, it was the best intro you could have as a cowbell, which people started thinking more cowbell, but then like the cult came up with that one song, which I love, with the and the Saturday night thing and all that. So the drummer of that band, with the Blue Oyster Cult, came off. I saw me, and he had a T-shirt, and he says, "Cork, I think you should have this," and it said "More Cowbell," because he says we got credit for the More Cowbell because of Saturday Night, but he said that he got the whole thing from the Queen. Felix, he was a good leader. He really he was boom boom. You know, you listen. It wasn't fun in terms of laying back. This was 10 hours a day in this hot loft.
The man had a vision.
He had a vision. Yeah, he came off of Cream. So he had that in his head.
Yeah.
If there's any sample or example of a great musical band, it's Cream. Besides the fact that, the trend of the sound of the band, the music was brilliant. And Felix, the way he produced it, the same way he produced Mountain Climbing, Try. In other words, a lot of guys would put effects on different things. You listen to Pink Floyd and you hear the effects out this way, which is one style. But Felix was not there, which between you and I liked a lot of that, but I never got it because he would tell me, "Shut the fuck up." And I'm sorry, you can bleep me out.
It's okay.
The point is he was in charge. He did have a vision, and the vision of mountain climbing still stands, which I have to give him credit.
I was actually going to ask you about how climbing sessions went. Sort of.
Sessions? You mean the actual goal is quick. They went really quick because at the time the money was coming out of Felix's production company. And then of course the record company eventually paid. But we had to move real quick and well rehearsed. I mean, this is something that people don't know that you have to do. A lot of bands don't do it anymore. They go in the studio and that's when they rehearse and depending on what studio. But it was well rehearsed. As I said, this loft on 39th Street, no air conditioning, nothing, 10 hours a day, not stop bringing the bagels and cream cheese and keep going. And there's pictures like even here's a perfect example. Is that great? See the picture? Can you make it out with the drum just sitting there, totally exhausted? This is the beginning of the. So I'm telling you, with the tempo, and it was work. And you mentioned out how do you play besides these Sun amps, who by the way was given to by Jimi Hendrix, gave Leslie a Sun amp, or sold them, and it was loud. It was really loud. And as a result, I'm wearing hearing aids now, but I'm all right. I'll live. Felix was the director. He was, he had the whip, and you remember the movie Whiplash?
Yes.
That was Felix. So we would play a song for like 30 times in a row, just one after getting over this corner and that corner. So it was well conceived, but it was work. Probably the hardest I ever worked. And as a result of that, when Leslie and I went on our own, never a rehearsal, nothing, because as a reaction to Leslie's rehearsal habit, the best part of an hour rehearsal is the 45-minute hamburger break.
Your Leslie impression is amazing.
Well, I've been with her a while.
Yeah.
Just have to drink enough and smoke it to get that fun. But it was worth every downbeat. It was worth it. For me, that was my 50,000 miles, whatever they call that. We went for it. And we paid for it in a lot of ways too. But I don't regret a thing about that.
I'm glad you have no regrets.
Yeah, I'm stretching that a bit. If I think a bit about it, I'll come up with a couple. But no, it's all part of the deal. It's the cards we're given.
If you can dig back into the recesses of your memory to the mountain days, this is a music show, so what records were you listening to at the time? What influenced you as a player?
The band. I love the band. I love Van Morrison. I didn't listen to a lot of heavier stuff.
Mhm.
I loved a couple of songs like the Allman Brothers, Silver Dollar, and I'm picking out certain. There was a Philadelphia band. They did a song called "Oh Girl," which I love.
Mhm.
I listen to all the time, even cry. And but I listened to a lot of jazz. I was listening to Miles Davis. I think it was called The Bitch. Was it The Bitch? Something.
Bitches Brew?
Bitches Brew, yeah.
I just talked about that record.
Great, amazing stuff. Yeah. We were on the road with Miles Davis. That's what was amazing. We played Harvard University in I guess their field. We were with them, and I remember saying to myself, Miles thinking, but it was a lot of fun, and he was doing his thing, At the time, I was very in the village. There was a place that made clothes, and they made snakeskin. It was a big thing at the time. So I had these snakeskin pants made at this place. I bring that up because the next day I go in, and who else is having snakeskin pants?
Miles Davis.
I remember it was in the paper. Like, oh, by the way, this shop, whatever it was called, the snake shop. And they had a picture of me. This is Los Angeles Times of me in the snakeskin pants. It also say, and Miles Davis just walked out with a snakeskin. And you can't, snakeskin doesn't give, so you have to make sure it fits.
Yep.
Because you can't stretch. I know I brought it up, but you had Miles Davis there. So Miles. Yeah. Who else do we listen to? There was McLaughlin. The jazz, a couple of jazz things I liked. Larry Coryell was a friend of mine. We listened to a lot of stuff he did, and a lot of music going. Of course, the Hendrix stuff, but I listened to that before. That was in the mid '60s, because now we're in 7 years later. So I have to say, I remember we were friendly with Hendrix. He came down and jammed a couple of times at this rehearsal place with Leslie. I was there in and out, but he put together the Band of Gypsies. And I have to say that was the one thing I was so in love with the experience. And I really loved Mitch Mitchell's drumming. And I don't know what Noel was doing. We got to be friends. But it was just, you can talk about chemistry. Those three, it was over the top. And I love the Gordon Lightfoot and all, that kind of. And I did like the band Bread. I mean, they're from Memphis. And I just loved his voice, Traffic. I love Stevie Winwood, his stuff, and we're on tours with these were I was big fans of theirs. It was an energy. I mean, so being on the road with it was a big kick. I'm sorry, I'm thinking you got me thinking like my brain is going crazy here. So that's about it for that in terms of listening to at the time. I mean, I listened to everything, but I don't know, you're on the road and I was carrying my cassette player and carrying all this stuff you're bringing to listen to. And by the time you get to your room, you're sleeping, you never get a chance to listen. The drummers, I mean, I love Ginger, but I just stayed away from him because I knew everything.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
That's it. I stayed away from because he would get back to have the opinions in the English papers comparing Mountain to Cream, and he would get in there in the opinion of Mountain like Cream. I was the leader of Cream, and now we were this and that. Corky Laing, he can't play drums for a that wasn't that bad, but at the time I was so happy he mentioned my name.
According to Leslie, Climbing was mixed through a set of dashboard speakers because they wanted to hear how this stuff would sound in the wild. Quote, "You aren't going to hear it out of $4,000 studio monitor speakers. You're gonna hear it on a fucking radio." I love this guy. He talked how I think. The track listing of Climbing goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Mississippi Queen, followed by Theme for an Imaginary Western, then Never in My Life, and side 1 closes with Silver Paper. Opening up side 2, we have For Yasgur's Farm, followed by To My Friend, then The Laird, next Sittin' on a Rainbow, and the album closes with Boys in the Band. Climbing was released March 7th, 1970, 55 years and 1 month ago. I got Corky for this episode. Will you accept it a month late? Off the back of the single released in February, Mississippi Queen. It was sampled by the Beastie Boys. It was featured in The Simpsons and The Dukes of Hazzard. It was covered by Van Halen. Ozzy recorded it for his covers album. It features Leslie on guitar, and a couple years back, Mississippi Queen blew up on TikTok. About the Queen's success, Leslie said, quote, "Every time I hear it, I call my accountant." There were 2 versions of the single, one with the B-side for the general market and one with Mississippi Queen on both sides so DJs wouldn't get smart and play the B-side instead of the A-side. I know Mountain did a feature in the April 2nd, 1970 issue of Rolling Stone to promote climbing. I know it was written by John Morthland. It was called Mountain is One Loud Mother, but I can't find this thing anywhere because A, Abby Hoffman was in that issue, and B, John Morthland has passed. For those 2 reasons, that issue is behind a very high paywall. Let's hear some more about this promotional cycle and Mountain's reception from someone who is actually there.
The Queen has certainly had its moment in pop culture. It was in a Simpsons episode, I think in the Dukes of Hazzard. It went viral on TikTok a couple years ago. I don't know if you knew about that.
I hear about it. It's great. I don't do TikTok or something. Yeah, we spend a lot of time in Finland. So a lot of stuff that's going on in America, we don't hear. But TikTok, I heard about that. The Simpsons was a financial pleasure. That was good. That was
I
good.
bet.
You know.
In 1971, you guys were on the legendary German television show Beat Club. You played a few songs for Beat Club. Music in a lot of ways is specific to culture, like you said. Records that people just did not get on one side of the pond would take off on the other and vice versa. How was Mountain received in America versus in Europe?
I think we opened up with Don't Look Around, which is all drums. If you listen on that show, I remember Felix saying, "We're going to do Don't Look Around." And that's a tough song to play because it's rolling, it goes through sections, and Leslie's dressed up like a Spanish Zorro with his hat.
The hat, yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I remember people sending me to that. I went, wow, it was good. It was all tom-toms, and they loved it. They loved the drumming. I'm glad about that. That's Germany, right? And in England, they love the Nantucket Sleigh Ride thing because the middle part, which is called the Sleigh Ride, they used it as a news intro. They were using that for 20 years. We didn't have that one quintessential hit in Europe. Nantucket Sleigh Ride would be the closest. The Queen they knew about. But it took a long time. I think they came back from, I don't know. It's all sales and performance. I go by the royalty sheets. Well, that's what you can see. You probably know this because apparently you study this historical musical stuff. In Europe and England, it's optics because they had the magazines, Melody. So the musicians had to look good. That's why all the English invasions, they all look really sharp.
I was going to ask you about the clothes. Because I am a female fan and I do pay attention to these things.
Well, you do. And you'll understand that we had a fucking identity crisis in Mountain. We did. Leslie, he dressed like all his granny takes a trip, all the English velour,
and with all the rings.
The rings and the scarves. And Felix.
The big hair.
That's right. Steve.
You had some hair too.
Well, I had hair. I had good hair. Actually, it was. I see the picture. Like, wow, look at that. I couldn't wear too much because I remember we were playing Carnegie Hall. Big game, first band to play Carnegie Hall. And I remember I had to go shopping. So I went to the store and I got to buy a beautiful, beautiful silk knitted shirt, black, where you can see through. It was all like flowers knitted. It was very precious. So I'm playing it. By the end of the show, the shirt is like it's coming to just fall
Oh,
with the perspiration. It was like, and here I am trying to dress really cool. So I was a bit limited
no.
because
Mhm,
even when I wore tight pants, I'm sitting there
mhm.
playing and they rip open, and there's my junk somewhere out there.
Oh
And
God.
yeah, anyway, but without going there, we had an identity crisis when it came to, I always thought that because I looked at mountain PR pictures and went, what the hell is going on? These the Eagles, they had the Western look,
Mhm.
flannel shirts and all that.
Which I
And
mean, you guys referenced as well.
Dickie Betts, I went down to do a record of my own. I ran into Dickie Betts, a wonderful guy, and we had a big party at his house, and it's a big, one of those summertime picnics. And he said, "Corky, come here, I'll show you something." I go,
Mhm.
"Come on, go upstairs." I go to his house. He opens his closet. These beautiful Granny Takes a Trip jackets and
Oh
linen
wow.
and this stuff. And I said, "How come you don't wear that?" He said, "The band won't let me. The Allman Brothers have to let
Oh
the country folks."
yeah.
So that was their thing. And at first I couldn't believe it. And then I realized when you look at it, the Allman Brothers, then he wanted to wear those clothes. He loved the look.
Mhm.
And I felt bad for him, but not that bad. Uh, it was just, you're talking about the vanity of bands and
Mhm.
different things, and the music doesn't match the clothes, and all that. My favorite of all persons is David Bowie. He didn't give a shit. He did anything he wanted. He
He
would just
did.
all the time. And he was just breaking when we were over there in the early
Mhm.
70s. And I remember in England, they said they couldn't believe that they loved Leslie because he didn't, he had the Peter Frampton look and you had all the skinny English guys, and
Mhm.
then there's Leslie, and it's kind of like, and they loved him anyways,
Yeah.
because it was different. It was kind of different. Um, yeah, so the point is back at the close. I mean, Leslie loved to dress up. He was like Jackie Gleason, always looking sharp, whether he was wearing feathers,
Mhm.
whatever. They called him the psychedelic peacock. That's what they call him.
Mhm.
Because he didn't care. He walked through the airports, and even Felix, Les, can you tone it down a bit? Everybody, because this is not this the hair and everything. Leslie walking through,
Mhm.
he made Hendrick look straight. That's how far he went. But the closing was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I liked it. I just couldn't wear it on stage.
Yeah. Forgive me for digging up the deep cuts, but there's this footage floating around on YouTube of Mountain on a PBS show that was simply called The Show. This would have been in like 1970. You guys played Mississippi Queen and Imaginary Western for all of these teenagers like sitting on the floor.
Yeah, it
What
was
do you
Hershey,
remember?
Pennsylvania. I
Yeah.
remember everything about that because the cartoonist on the show was a super conservative guy, a very well known. I can't think of his
Mm,
name right now, but he and Felix got in a political argument on the show because he was talking. This guy didn't like the hippie things, and we didn't consider
oh.
ourselves hippies. We were just guys.
You're just a rock band, you know?
Yeah, it was. That was our first live show. And by the way,
Really?
did you check out what I was wearing at that point? I had this cloth that like this.
Did.
It was one piece. It was like one piece shirt that went right down. It would look like skin. It was like a skin tight thing, and I
I
loved
noticed
it.
it was quite light.
Yeah, it was like that's right. I'm laughing. Yes, I remember. What was the question about the show? Sorry.
I was just wondering what you remembered of that day and how you guys got that gig.
I have no idea, but it was a PBS. It
Mm.
was a PBS show. Felix had something to do with it because he worked on the Muppet shows on the side. He did some musical direction. So he had some in. I don't know how we did it, but it was PBS was starting to become very popular. And this was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I didn't understand the kids being there either, but they were circle was like a camp, and there we were playing. And for some wonderful reason, they got a great sound on that one. Because when you listen, it sounds very much like the record, the mix and stuff. But Al Capp, Al Capp was the cartoonist, very well known. Look
Mhm.
him up, CAPP, Al Capp. And he hated the whole rebel anti-Vietnam vote. In other words, we were exact opposite. And Felix and him in the show got in an argument. That's the way I remember it. But I remember playing and we rehearsed the hell out of the show because again, it's the first time live and our music is not like very pretty. I mean, you have to be able to grab it. As a matter of fact, as I was listening, because we had this show I had to do with Abigail, who knows me. So I said,
Oh gosh.
I put on my hearing things, and I'm listening to the song and I'm hearing keyboard parts that I never remember hearing. Beautiful parts. I still use it for advertisement and stuff, I think now, because again, we're talking 55 years ago.
Just about.
That's what this show, isn't this a celebration of the?
Yeah.
That's very good. Thank you. Because I was only 10 years old when I played in that band. I remember we did a across Canada train to a Festival Express across Canada. The band was on there.
Mm-hmm.
And Mississippi. So I told Levon, I said, Levon.
Great film.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Yes. And he, as it turned out, we weren't in it because the guy that was filming us was on acid and he forgot to put the film in. So you won't see any.
No.
Seriously. That's just terrible, but that's the truth. Because I kept, why was it one of our best shows? Toronto and stuff, and we're really sorry, but we can't find the tape on that. But I was on the train with Levon. I said, Levon, I think I owe you some publishing. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, in Mississippi Queen is like a long credible creek, right?
Okay.
Mississippi Queen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a drum beat called the backbeat, right? And
Yeah.
he said, Corky, I gotta tell you, I do not hear any of my influence on Mississippi Queen. Don't worry about my publishing. Anyways, it's just that he was a big influence.
Ultimately, Mountain could never quite follow up the success of the Queen or Climbing. The follow-up Nantucket Sleigh Ride did well in Europe, but was just a tad too much too soon for American audiences. So, what do I think of Climbing? Going in, I have quite literally been looking forward to this episode for a year. Last spring, at the Northampton Record Fair, I found one of Mountain's live albums. I'm gonna be honest, I picked this up for the album art and for Mountain's connection to Cream. This is me we're talking about here. Apparently, I'm on the cover of a Blind Faith bootleg album. If something crosses through the Eric Clapton extended cinematic universe, I'm going to pick it up. After that live album, I moved on to the studio albums. I tracked down Climbing in the fall and was obsessed. That was around the time of my New York trip, where I found Leslie's album at Rough Trade. I reached out to Corky's manager in January, spoke with Corky in March, and here we are in April of the next year. This episode has been cooking away for a full 12 months. And it's well worth the wait for me. Climbing is one of my favorite albums of the 1970s. When I say that, people go, Mountain? Who's Mountain? Oh, you know. Oh, I know that one. Wait, there was an album? What set Mountain apart? For one, their band leader was especially knowledgeable on how to make, produce, and promote music. About Felix, Leslie said, quote, I don't think there are any geniuses, but I do think his knowledge of music was incredible. He had a classical music sensibility which he infused into his music. At a certain point, it dawns on you that Felix might have had equal influence on Cream to Cream's influence on Mountain. Rock and roll is a symbiotic relationship, an endless exchange of energy. Bringing me to my next point. This principle applies to any great band. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. Watching the live appearances Corky and I spoke about, Jesus, these guys were a force. You see it in the sweat on their brows. They did not half-ass it. Even Steve, in his quiet demeanor, his energy flows right into it. Having two singers in the band was a tremendous asset. It blows the possibilities for repertoire wide open. Mountain could go heavy, they could go folk, they could go blues, they could go on to do Nantucket Sleigh Ride. Not prog, but progressive. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? The West is the best. Of course I'm a Leslie West girly. Are you kidding? He looked like this and sounded like that, and he was funny as hell. It's a no-brainer. And a guitarist too? That's not fair, man. That's my cheat code. But seriously, Leslie's playing is the definition of quality over quantity, and that trait is not lost on me. As we move farther into the decade, we have a whole lot of guitarists playing a whole lot of notes while having nothing to say with them. That was not Leslie. I believe it was Felix who gave him the instrument he became known for, the Les Paul Jr. Through all his little inflections and big solos on Climbing, one might say Leslie was in the ranks of men who could make a Les Paul cry. The power of the Les Paul Jr. is exalted on Mountain's signature song and Climbing's opener, Mississippi Queen. It kicks off with that punishing 18-wheeler riff. Well, it actually starts with the cowbell. Thank you, Corky. I hope you call your accountant every time you hear that cowbell. After a year of drifting away from Climbing and coming back to it, I still sit with my mouth agape, wondering how this is just 2 guitar parts. 1 part automatic double track, 1 part the overdubbed solos, that's it. That's all he needed to sound like that. Even before I knew the story of the Queen, that she was a real and very hot chick Corky was trying to get with, I picked up on that sexual tension. Mississippi Queen is a hip shaker. That's the language of music. To have a tone that sounds like that, you really should have the voice to match. Leslie had no problem with that. He sounded like if you handed a blues holler a flamethrower. Voices like his don't exist anymore because you only get to singing that way through shouting over the amps. Just like drummers like Corky don't exist anymore because they weren't mic'd. What else is there to say? Tight, high replay value, 2.5 minutes of muscle, no fat to be heard. This is a perfect rock and roll single. Oh, and I know Leslie didn't like the... but it's literally one of my favorite moments of the song. Both Leslie and Corky said that Mountain fumbled by not following up Mississippi Queen with another hard rock single. Their next was For Yasgur's Farm. They both said it should have been Never in My Life. Hello? Do we all suddenly have theme from an Imaginary Western amnesia? Why was this not a single? Imaginary Western introduces Felix's singing style. It's more lyrical, dynamic, folksy, almost woman tone. I think that was the term Corky used. More like Jack Bruce's voice. It makes sense. This is a Pete Brown and Jack Bruce penned song. The climbing arrangement is very different. The strange jazz-like time changes are gone. Felix even tweaks the melody slightly. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize Imaginary Western is the story of a rock band. Rock and roll back then was the wild, wild west. When the wagons leave the city for the forest further on, that's going on tour. Painted wagons are painted buses. This becomes a little more obvious in the next verse. Oh, the dancing and the singing, oh, the music that they played, oh, the fires that they started, oh, the girls with no regret. The story of every rock and roll band, Mountain included, can be found in the next line. Sometimes they found it, sometimes they kept it, often lost it along the way. This is a more keys and bass forward recording. I always listen for what instruments are placed where. That much reflects Jack's original recording, as does Felix's lyrical and complex bass line. Steve is most prominent on Imaginary Western and its twin song For Yasgur's Farm. He really is the guy everyone forgets about, and it's a shame. Imaginary Western would not be the bittersweet romance it is without his washes of organ and occasional mellotron. Never in My Life returns to the tone the Queen set. There's even a cowbell. You know, for all the American Cream comparisons Mountain got and still gets, there's one fundamental difference. Cream was 3 guys all soloing at once. That does not happen with Mountain. Felix has his solos and flourishes through the verses before linking up with the riff. Leslie has his licks here and there, but for the most part, it's more straightforward. It's even an I Love My Lady, She's So Fine song. In this sense, Climbing has a bit of an identity crisis. It's a mountain with 2 faces, one leaning towards I wouldn't say folksier sounds, but maybe more melody-driven, and one that wears rock and roll and the blues on its sleeve. Silver Paper joins the two faces in harmony. We have co-lead vocals by Leslie and Felix. It's equal parts of the two sides, prominent organ and a lyrical bass line with hard driving drums and a strong riff. It even splits the difference between the Queen and Imaginary Western's runtimes. I do not know what's going on with the recording fidelity on Felix's verses, but there's this high-pitched tinny affect on the high end. The whole record has a lot of surface noise on it too. This might have been from recording quickly and cheaply. It becomes very obvious on the call and response chorus. Felix has that weird tin trace, but Leslie does not. Or maybe he just overpowers it. Who knows? For Yasgur's Farm might have made more sense as a single had Mountain been in the original cut of the Woodstock film. Alas, they missed out. Felix's melody on the verses is quite similar in structure to Imaginary Western. I don't know if the both of them together could have been viable singles. One would have been considered derivative of the other. Leslie's chorus, "Look at me, I believe it's true, you're a part of me, I'm a part of you," is all the conviction of the Woodstock generation when the Woodstock dream was still fresh. When he really rips it, I get goosebumps. Climbing was released in March of 1970, March 7th to be exact. The Woodstock film wouldn't be out for another 3 weeks. The Woodstock dream was still in its infancy. He flips "I believe it's true" to "Can't you see it's true" in the next chorus, inviting us into the Woodstock dream. The utopia, crystal passing, reflecting in our eyes, eclipsing all the jealousy and lies, man. A modern listener might relate more to this vision of that weekend on Yasgur's Farm. Was it me who let you walk away? Were you the one, or is it we're the same? Looking back on Woodstock is haunting, seeing all that unity and potential languish in the mud. Our failures in the 55 years since are more glaring than ever, but I can't help but feel like my generation has the most in common with the boomers for all of our powers and pitfalls. Musically, the strongest point of Yasgur's Farm is Steve and Leslie's dueling solos. How they move into playing the chorus without the lyrics. It's a taste of the sunshiny grandness without being quite so on the nose. What is the rule of thumb for interludes? They have to serve the tone of the album. Does To My Friend serve the tone of the album? Yes. To My Friend places climbing among its peers, heavy bands tapping into European folk elements. What else came out that year and capitalized on that idea very hard? Led Zeppelin 3. I was very surprised to learn the Laird was so political. It felt like an old folk story. His crime was a passion, an aching for peace, and the white men keep him could link this song to most any point in history. Is the Laird an escaped convict? An escaped slave? Is he a religious martyr? Of course I clocked the connection to the story of Moses, Let My People Go. The Laird is an oddball track for sure, but it's simple and beautiful. Once again, we return to formula after our period of introspection with Sittin' on a Rainbow. Another I Love My Lady, She's So Fine song. And another song about the jet-setting lifestyle doing rock star things. It's not lost on me that the first letter of every word in Sittin' on a Rainbow spells sore. Lots of planes in the lyrics. It extends the warm, joyful feeling from Silver Paper, but lyrically this is a weak spot for the album. Musically, it's light fare as well. It's ground we've covered before on this LP and more effectively. I don't think Climbing ever quite regains its bearings after the Laird, and that's unfortunate. Boys in the Band is an odd closer tonally, with its somber piano and unconventional chord progression. It sort of ascends into air and never comes down, but lyrically, it works. It's about leaving the rock and roll lifestyle behind, whether temporarily or permanently, the listener doesn't know. The feeling is quite unsettled, as is the rock and roll lifestyle, but so is coming home and having to acclimate to real life again. It's almost as if Mountain knew that this is the best things we're gonna get for them. It's really a shame Mountain could never quite get it again after Climbing. They had it, almost kept it, and lost it along the way. Things quickly spiraled out of control after Nantucket's sleigh ride, clashing rock star egos and meddling spouses and all. You know the story. Most know Mountain as little more than the band with the mustache and the fat guy, known for Mississippi Queen and nothing else. But I see them as so much more. This potent blend of personalities, a whole lot of larger-than-life figures, has left its mark. Here are just some of the songs that have sampled them.
Rap critics say he's money cash holes. I'm from the. And here's another hit, Baby Bonds.
Both Leslie and Mountain have had pop culture staying power through the 21st century. Though it's overlooked in the classic rock community, Climbing is such a huge record. It's reached across 3 decades, easily. It carried the torch of the 60s power trio. The Experience, obviously Cream. Blues with Purple Polka Dots, as David Frick said. They represented the hard rock sensibilities of the 70s. They might even lay claim to that amorphous thing called heavy metal. The lineage of this braggadocious in-your-face volume can easily be traced into the decade to follow. Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads. And thanks to the Zoomers on TikTok and our ever unpredictable music habits, they've lasted into the 2020s. There's something to be said for a band you just can't get rid of. I haven't been able to get rid of them for a year. Each man was perfectly suited for the job, perfectly suited to his role, and did his part to lift the group to a truly enviable position for any rock and roll band. Ultimate band chemistry. I believe the Mamas and the Papas named that intangible thing Harvey. Mountain climbed the mountain and found Harvey. You swap anyone out and you lose that. Climbing is big, bold, brash, loaded with personality, and does not waste my time. This is one of my favorite records of the decade and most played albums in my entire collection. 55 years later, Mountain is still one loud mother. My personal favorites off this one are Mississippi Queen, Theme for an Imaginary Western, Never in My Life, Silver Paper, and The Laird. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is Mountain Climbing 55 years later.
So our time here is just about up. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we, again, in the video, before we cut back to our regularly scheduled Vinyl Mondaying, and I talk with my hands.
I see that.
It's a regional thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Before I let you go, do you have any current projects that you'd like to share with us? Anything to promote?
I just don't want to come off as a promo slut. Number one, the book.
Yes.
The book, the Letters to Sarah, is very important to me. Here we go. Oh, look, we got here. Ladies and gentlemen, can you see it? Finished Sessions. Oh, man, I'd like to show you something here. Good hair day, honey. Ian Hunter plays on it from Out the Hoop. A couple of friends from those days. Mm-hmm. And it's a really good record. Thank you for having me. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to promote a record that's 55 years old. But what's so fantastic about that is we're on tour. When I say we're on tour, I have this band in Europe that we play, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Poland, and we're going back in May to Austria and Italy. So I'm playing a lot in Europe. And what's happening for me is keeping the mountain climbing repertoire alive. It's amazing because they don't really speak the English, but they know the music. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it transcends all the bullshit. They love the music. I love to play it because I'm able to keep it alive 55 years later, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that idea. And, you know, a lot of my brothers and sisters, my peers are dirt napping. They're not around right now, but I still promote that what I can, the music of it. And to me, that's the blessing. So that's all I have to promote is the songs. And that's my job.
I want to thank Corky for being a part of this episode. You give a damn good interview. It was quite humbling being in the presence of one of the mountain men, even if it was just through a screen. For the whole time I've written about rock and roll, I have stood on the shoulders of giants. And that day I got to, Chill with a Giant. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Mountain? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Mondays at 11, and a new Dolls Pod every other Friday at noon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!